ask. Some theories, and perhaps some disciplines, concentrate on the origin of myth, others on the function, still others on the subject matter. Only a few theories address all three questions, and some of the theories that address origin or function deal with either why or how, but not both. It is commonly said that theories of the 19th century focused on the question of origin, and that theories of the 20th century have focused on the questions of function and subject matter. But this characterization confuses historical origin with recurrent origin. Theories that profess to provide the origin of myth claim to know not where and when myth first arose, but why and how myth arises wherever and whenever it does. The issue of recurrent origin has been as popular with 20th century theories as with 19th century ones, and interest in function and subject matter was as common to 19th century theories as to 20th century ones. There is one genuine difference between 19th and 20th century theories. 19th century theories tended to see the subject matter of myth as the physical world and to see the function of myth as either a literal explanation or a symbolic description of that world. Myth was typically taken to be the primitive counterpart to science, which was assumed to be wholly modern. Science rendered myth not merely redundant, but outright incompatible, so that moderns, who by definition are scientific, had to reject myth. By contrast, 20th century theories had tended to see myth as almost anything but an outdated counterpart to science, either in subject matter or in function. Consequently, moderns are not obliged to abandon myth for science. Besides the questions of origin, function, and subject matter, questions often asked about myth include: is myth universal? Is myth true? The answers to these questions stem from the answers to the first three questions. A theory which contends that myth arises and functions to explain physical processes will likely restrict myth to societies supposedly bereft of science. By contrast, a theory which contends that myth arises and functions to unify society may well deem myth acceptable and perhaps even indispensable to all societies. A theory which maintains that myth functions to explain physical processes is committed to the falsity of myth if the explanation given proves incompatible with the scientific one. A theory which maintains that myth functions to unify society may circumvent the issue of truth by asserting that society is unified when its members believe that the laws they are expected to obey were established long ago by revered ancestors, whether or not those laws really were established back then. This kind of theory sidesteps the question of truth because its answers to the questions of origin and function do. Definition of myth. I have attended many a conference at which speakers fervently propound on the nature of myth in novel X or play Y or film Z, yet so much of the argument depends on the definition of myth. Let me make explicit my own proposed one. To begin with, I propose defining myth as a story. That myth, whatever else it is a story may seem self-evident. After all, when asked to name myths, most of us think first of stories about Greek and Roman gods and heroes. Yet myth can also be taken more broadly as a belief or credo. For example, the American rags to riches myth and the American myth of the frontier. Horatio Alger wrote scores of popular novels illustrating the rags to riches myth, but the credo itself does not rest on a story. The same is true of the myth of the frontier. All of the stories considered in this book deem myth a story. True, E.B. Tyler turns the story into a tacit generalization, but the generalization is still conveyed by a story. True, Claude Levi-Strauss ventures beyond the story to the structure of myth, but again the structure is conveyed by the story. Theories that read myth symbolically rather than literally still take the subject matter, or the meaning, to be the unfolding of a story. If, then, myth is to be taken here as a story, what is the story about? For folklorists above all, myth is about the creation of the world. In the Bible, only the two creation stories, Genesis 1 and 2, the Garden of Eden story, Genesis 3, and the Noah story, Genesis 6 through 9, would thereby qualify as myths. All the other stories would instead constitute either legends or folk tales. Outside the Bible, the Oedipus myth, for example, would actually be a legend. I do not propose being so rigid and will instead define myth as simply a story about something significant. The story can take place